Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. So this is going to be a performance test of the K390 Endura, as well as my initial impressions of the knife. So I picked this up because I'd heard how great the performance was of this K390, and I wanted to get one of the Seki City models, and ultimately decided to go with the Endura because I'd heard a lot of great things about it over the years. And I don't have very many blades of this size, and just really wanted to try out the Endura. So I picked it up, and immediately when I got it, I put it through this same sort of toughness test with the factory edge. And the test pretty much consists of, as you can see here, cutting some 16 gauge speaker wire, batoning through it, cutting zip ties, batoning through the zip ties, and these are really thick pieces of zip ties, as well as some wood, digging into some very hard wood and chopping on it, and then a couple spine whacks just to see how the lock held up. And so far, as we're going through the test right now, the wire didn't do anything to the edge, neither did the zip tie. Batoning through it didn't cause any issues, but as you can see, it's sort of slinging that zip tie around. So I did it 7 or 8 times and then stopped, but didn't cause any damage. After each different test, I used just a regular sheet of notebook paper to test the edge and looked at it to see if there was any damage. And the first few things that I did caused no issues. It may have slightly changed the level of sharpness to a high degree of hair popping sharpness down a little bit, but for the most part it didn't do much of anything to the edge. It's still shaven sharp, as you can see there. And moving on to the wood right here, pressing my fingernail into the wood to show you how hard it is. It's a very dense piece of wood, and just digging into it, putting a lot of lateral pressure on the edge just to see if it could cause any damage. Really putting a lot of pressure on the knife overall, and the lockup and the solidity of this knife is pretty good. It has a little bit of up and down play, but I think that's not unusual for a backlock like this. So it held up to that test pretty well too. Cut right through the paper, no issues with damage, cleanly slicing steel. Then we did about 20 or 30 just smacking the edge up against this hard piece of wood. Looked at it again, no issues. Another paper slice, I believe, after this. Yeah, so still cleanly slicing through the paper, no issues. And then here's the spine whack. I did this about 10-15 times just to see if it would cause any lock stick or any more play, but it was perfectly just as smooth afterwards as before I did it. And then now we're getting into the little bit harder stuff. So this is just a standard piece of copper block, and I'm just kind of chewing into those corners of it, just slicing off material just to see if it'll cause any chips. Now I will say, with the factory edge, this did actually cause a few little micro chips in the edge, and I was expecting it to do the same after I'd sharpened it, but as you're seeing here, I cut into it a good bit, checked the edge, and there was absolutely no damage, no issues at all after I had put my own edge on there. So that just kind of goes to show that the factory edges don't hold up as well as after the knife is sharpened once or twice. And then, just to see if I could get it to damage, I dropped the edge onto the corner of the copper block. Still caused no issues. I've done this in the past with other knives and it caused chips, so I just wanted to see if it would do it here, but it didn't cause any issues. So still cleanly slicing the paper. Now we're going to move on to a dried up can of putty that I had laying around and test the tip on this and stab it through there 5 times. And you can see the tip's fully intact. And we're also going to open the can. So here's the 5 stabs. Caused no damage, no chips. Tip looked exactly the same before and after. So I was pretty impressed with that, but not surprised. still cleanly slicing through the tip, no issues. Now we're getting into opening this can, and this is actually going to cause a little bit of damage. This caused one little small chip about 3/8 of an inch away from the tip, and you saw at the beginning I knocked this lid down into the can so it was nice and tight, and used the largest portion of the edge I could to open it, because I knew it would break the tip if I just stuck the tip in there, and it caused that little chip. You guys can see it right there, about 3/8 from the end of the knife, and it's catching on the paper a little bit there. And then that was originally the end of the test, but it did so well that I decided to put it through some more harder tasks. So I'm just saying that everything did pretty well, held up pretty well. And then moving on, I'm going to do a little harder stabbing test with the copper and with the can, and then some edge smacks up against the corner of that copper block, and see how that holds up. So here we're stabbing the top of the can with a little more force and going further in there, and then I'm going to check the edge up against the paper again. No issues. Again, didn't cause any damage at all. No chips, no rolls, no nothing. And the tip was still perfectly intact at that point. How it does with the copper on the tip. Uh-oh, heard something crack. Alright, so you can hear right there where the tip broke, and that really didn't surprise me. I've stabbed a knife into a piece of copper and brass before like that, and it broke the tip. If you've got a knife with a fine tip on it, it's pretty likely that it will take the very end of it off if you do that, just because it's so dense, and it sort of just grabs a hold of the knife, and if it twists at all one way or the other, it'll take the tip with it. So that doesn't really surprise me, and doesn't negatively affect my opinion of the steel overall, because I think that would have happened with 90% of super steels, as they call them, with the given hardness that they have. So checking the edge right now from hitting it up against that copper block. Stabbing it into it broke the tip, but smacking the edge up against it didn't cause any more damage, didn't really change the sharpness level very much at all. So we're going to go back at it one more time, and I'm hitting it pretty hard here, being kind of careful not to hurt myself, but hitting it up against there with a good bit of force, and it's just taking it like a champ. So up in this point, all we have is a broken tip and one little chip from opening that putty can. So I'm highly impressed overall. Torqued it to the side and broke it. And then there's one more test, which is an aluminum block, and we're pretty much going to do the same thing, except for I'm not going to stab into it, because the tip's already busted and just didn't feel the need to. But overall, the Spyderco Endura is a nice knife. It's been in production since the 1980s. I wasn't extremely impressed with the overall fit and finish of the knife. It wasn't bad, but a lot of things on it are kind of crudely done. If you look inside, the scales on the blade and everything, it's just not super refined compared to some of their other knives. As well, it has really, really thin washers inside. One of the screws was loose from the factory, and the Chicago screw was sliding back and forth in there. So really the only reason, in my opinion, to buy one of these knives is for this blade. If it wasn't for this K390, I couldn't see myself purchasing any of these Seki City models, if I'm honest. But the performance of this steel is phenomenal. I cut a couple 100 feet of cardboard with the factory edge, as well as after it was sharpened, and it held up extremely well. Almost 200 feet of cardboard before it stopped shaving hair. So I'm extremely impressed with it, and the edge after I sharpened it did even better. And then the performance of this toughness test, you can see after all the tests, still easily slicing magazine paper. So extremely impressed with the performance.